Good afternoon, everyone. Today we have a special guest, Dr. Maarten Rotman. Dr. Maarten Rotman, he is the Assistant Dean of Medical Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the Dell Medical School at the University of Texas at Austin. Just to give a brief about Dr. Maarten, he is originally a research scientist. Or maybe I should not be speaking.
Career presentation. Right?
Okay, to not spoil, I will let him talk about his career path, because this is the whole idea of this talk, is to talk about his career, and he actually has a wide range of experiences, and this will tell you a lot about how careers in academia, they are not exactly linear. There are many ways that you can take on your career path as a biotechnologist. So welcome, Dr. Maarten, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, because otherwise, I've been told that I talk way too fast. And so, Dr. Mariam, thank you very much for the kind, even though I got you a short introduction. If she explains everything that I've done, well, then I'll have to talk even faster. Just on that. In fact, I have been told that I talk way too fast. So if I become, I'll try my best to slow down. But if it goes too fast, just let me know. All right, so interrupt me, stop me. I'll be more than happy to slow down so that we can get to the full hour. Otherwise, after half an hour, I'm like, okay, everybody out. So this might come as a shock to you here in the room, but I'm originally not from Egypt. I'm originally from the Netherlands, right? I was born in the Netherlands, but then after a few years or so, a decade or so, we moved to Curacao. Anyone knows here where Curacao is, even what Curacao is? See one? Yes, please.
It's a Caribbean island. It used to be part of the or is it still part of the kingdom? Is it still part of the
it is still part of the Dutch kingdom. That's exactly right. So I grew up on a tiny little island in the Caribbean Ocean, in the Caribbean Sea. Right there, right in front of Venezuela. It's a very small island. It's about 60 kilometers wide. It's very nice. It's very, very nice. But it's also tiny. To give you a little bit of reference, that's about the same distance as from here to the center of New Cairo city, right? It's very, very, very small. Or 3 times between here and Alexandria, if you want to have a little bit more distance. And so it's very nice. It's very pretty. But it's also, it forces you to make some tough decisions early on, because one of the things that the island doesn't have is things like universities. And so when I was about 18 or so, I had to decide, okay, what am I going to do next? And if I want to go to university, where am I going to go? There are 2 real opportunity or choices, honestly, at that point. And you either go to the Netherlands and study there, or you go to the US and you study there. Now, the US, it's very expensive to go study. Tuition there is pretty significant. Since I come from just a regular run-of-the-mill middle-class family, that was not necessarily in the books for me. But in the Netherlands, as a social democracy, tuition over there is nearly free, relatively, especially compared to the US, a lot less expensive. And so I decided to leave, just like my sister before me, leave the Netherlands, or leave the island of Curacao and go to the Netherlands, which is right here. I think that most of you may have heard at least of the Netherlands, and maybe a rough indication of where it is, but it's right there in Europe, right? So in the Netherlands, you have a bunch of different universities. And the ones that I went to, actually, there's Egypt, just to show, right? So in the Netherlands, I had an opportunity to join a program at the Leiden University and the University of Technology Delft. Now, the reason why I chose those universities and why I decided to study life science and technology at those universities is honestly because I had a pretty good role model, and I had a hesitation to close doors behind me and stop opportunities from developing. So let me explain that a little bit better. on Curaçao, you can't just, it's about 6,000 kilometers away from the Netherlands. You can't just go and, observe a couple of courses in university while you're still in high school, right? To see what else is going on and if that course is something you want to do. However, my sister, 2 years before me, 2 years older than me, decided to go and pick that course for her studies. And she gave me all this great information back. And so she did life science and technology 2 years before me, and she got all this cool information and all this cool, feedback about the study. The study also was very, very new. Been a while that I studied this, quite a while actually. And they just started that course or that study in 2099, which was just a few years after I joined it. Because it was still so new, the professors were still very much in tune with wanting to update the classes to fit them to the needs of the students. It was also a collaboration between Leiden and Delft, two of the main universities in the Netherlands. Leiden is a more general university. Delft is a university of technology, which focuses really heavily on technological advancements. And their collaboration together was to create this new course, was really focused on making a new type of learner that would fit better with the life sciences business needs. So the needs of the businesses around the burgeoning biotech industry in the Netherlands at the time. So they went out and listened to what the companies needed and said, okay, you know what? We're going to make students who can do all those things. What do you think the company said they needed? They said they want everything. We want these students to know mathematics, chemistry, physics, everything, right? Genomics. And so that's basically what they did. So I did my bachelor's and my master's, as well as later on a PhD in the Netherlands. The bachelor's in life sciences, like I said, with Delft and Leiden. Whereas my master's, I could choose to go a little bit deeper. Let's dive in on these topics here and see what exactly they were talking. So the bachelor's in the Netherlands anyway is a 3-year program. And like I said, it focuses on things like mathematics, but also thermodynamics, chemistry. We did a lot of work in batch fermenters in Delft, because it's all very technological. We did a lot of genomics in Leiden and enzyme, proteomics and all these different types of omics over there. During my bachelor's, I also took a year off and decided, I'm going to take in that year off, going to go and support this new study association called SV Live, Study Association in Dutch, Live, which is a group of students working together to help education as well as different opportunities for the students themselves. And my role in that was to connect all of the students in the bachelor's and in the master's with the startup companies that were around the universities. So the Leiden University is right in the middle of a life sciences and biotechnology science park. And so there were a lot of startup companies around there. And so my role was to go and talk to these startup companies and say, like, hey, you want to, have some students come visit, or do you want to give us money so that we can have, better education and parties? Anyway, things to do, right? So we did that. I did that. And so it got me exposure to these startup companies, which to me was very, very interesting. So I really went out to get those kind of connections. After my bachelor's, I did a master's, because in the Netherlands, it's quite common to immediately go into your master's. You don't go into a PhD. So this is slightly different from, for example, the way education works in the US. I don't know how it is, honestly, here in Egypt, if it's similar. As in Europe? Okay, so then it's a very logical move to go from a bachelor straight into a master's roughly around the same topic. It's a 2-year master there, and it really dives in one of 4 tracks, right? And so now I have to take that step back already. Remember that I choose this course on one hand because of my sister as a role model, so okay, this is super cool. But on the other hand, also because all these different courses makes me think like, oh, I can do lots of different things. I will get lots of different skills to study. In your master's, we had to choose one specific track. I added an extra little minor to that. because again, I like to keep, doors open. And was a specialization on science-based business. It's a little bit of a smoking gun or foreshadowing for my later career. But that science-based business was really focused on what do companies need from to move innovations forward, right? Now, at the end of that master's, I had to make a choice again, right? I had to make a choice and say, okay, am I going to go and work in one of those companies that I've been connecting with throughout my bachelor's, right? One of the real reasons why I took that year off, to be able to meet those different companies. Or am I going to do a PhD, right? There was a really nice PhD opportunity in the neurosciences, but there were also some really interesting companies. And so I had to make a choice whether I wanted to go directly into the industry or first do a PhD. Now, I choose to do a PhD for a very simple reason. And that is, if I would go into a company now, at this point in my, that's called already a career. It's not really a career yet, right? It's just still studying. But if I would go straight into a company at this point, there is simply no way that I would later on go back and do a PhD. For two reasons. The first reason is that, you start building that pathway and you kind of go along that route, right? You want to start taking a career in the industry, and it's very hard to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to take a break from that to go back to school, as it were, and go back into university. The second reason, in the Netherlands, as a PhD student, you do get paid as an employee, but you definitely don't get paid as well as if you would go into the industry. And so going from the industry into a PhD would be a significant step back from a financial perspective. And I think that, as you progress in your career and you get somewhat higher salaries, your lifestyle tends to change. And so it makes it very hard to go back. And so I thought, okay, if I don't go and do my PhD now, I will never go and do it. So I decided, okay, I'm going to apply, and eventually got this really nice PhD position at the Leiden University Medical Center, where I actually met Dr. Ahmed as well. And so did a PhD in the departments of, and a collaborative department, by the way, between human genetics and the Department of Radiology. And so there's a bit of a theme going on here. My study, actually, the island of Curacao is a collaborative island to begin with. It is a melting pot of influences from all over the Caribbean, Latin America, South America, Europe, and specifically Netherlands and the United States. All gets together and people get to work together. My bachelor's and my master's were a combination between two universities. My PhD was in a department that was collaborating with a different department within the same universities. I personally think that collaborations are a great way to, first of all, meet different people, obviously, but also to be able to see that you always can bring some value to the table, but you also have some faults to the table. And there is no one perfect way to do something. So bringing other people in the conversation allows you to, see those different perspectives. The different perspective I got in my PhD was that there are multiple different types of antibody fragments, which I had no idea of. The antibody that I was working on were called VHHs, or nanobodies. Does anyone know what a nanobody is? Or a VHH? No one? Great. Does everybody know what an antibody looks like? A rough description? Y shape. Looks like a Y, right? So you got that Y shape like this, sticks up, sticks up like this, up. But then antibodies tend to have a second domain, right? They have this little bit here. So it's a heavy chain and a light chain. So the antibody that I was working with came from a particular species that did not have that light chain. So they were called heavy chain only antibodies. And those heavy chain only antibodies, what animal species do you think it came from? You all have seen these animals. They come from camelids. So all the camels that we've got walking around over here, dromedary, as well as the llamas, alpacas, they all have heavy chain only antibodies. Not all of their antibodies are like that, but about 50% of their antibodies are like that. There's one more species that have the same types of antibodies. They're not on land, they're sharks. So sharks also have heavy chain only antibodies, slightly different. But anyway, I was doing a lot of work with the antibodies of these guys. Click, click, do them.
The screen hasn't changed.
There you go. These guys, right? Camelids, alpacas, and that kind of stuff. And so my day of the day in my life as a PhD student did not include actually the real animals, right? By the time that we worked with it was just the blood samples, actually just the VHH samples already, because a predecessor of mine, she already selected the ones that we were working with. But what we did do, obviously, is a lot of, regular lab stuff that you do here, probably a lot of yourselves as well. So I'll fly through this really quickly. But my focus was on Alzheimer's disease. Presume everybody knows what Alzheimer's disease is, right? What's the key hallmark of Alzheimer's? Forgetting, exactly. That's a core element. It's part of the dementia group, right? So you forget stuff. Where do you see that most? If you look at pathologically? In the brain, exactly. And what do you see in the brain? Exactly. You see generation of the neurons. In fact, you see brains going and shrinking, right? And they shrink because they lose neurons. You see atrophy of the cerebral cortex, enlargement of the sulci, the gaps in there. You also see depositions of amyloid beta, as well as tangles of hyperphosphorylated tau. And so my role was to find VHHs, those antibodies, right? The antibody fragments, actually, that would very nicely bind to all of these problems, right? Obviously not to the gaps, but to the amyloid plaques and cerebral amyloid angiopathy and all those kind of things. It was not the only thing that I had to do. I also had to do a lot of proteomics. And so a lot of these kind of maps and figuring out what's going on over there. And I also did a lot of cell culture, live cell culture, as well as pathologies, Western blots. I did CT and SPECT and even made viruses. In fact, I actually went to the United States to learn how to exactly make an adeno-associated virus, AAVs. And then the last thing that we did a lot, actually not the last thing, we did work with live animals as well. So with mice that had mouse models of Alzheimer's disease. So one of the things that we did, it's kind of hard to see, but here we look at those amyloid deposits in the brain. We created tags on those VHHs. And then I used a virus to inject that in the brains of the mice. And then we I did some brain surgery, skull surgery, made a tiny little hole in the top of the skull, put a glass plate, and then we took a microscope. It's called a 2-photon microscope or a multi-photon microscope. So you can see into the brain and see the blood vessels like that. Another way to look into the brain or into the body is with the MRI that we had over there. So, and I think we still have at the LUMC a 7 Tesla, so pretty high, horizontal bore like this, MRI scanner for both animals as well as a giant one for humans. And it's not that very common that you have those types of things. But what's the most important thing when you do your research like this? Just to see if you guys are not asleep yet. What's the most important, the one thing that you have to do to show that you're having any impact? Thank you. Exactly, right? You guys have to keep that in the back of your mind as you're doing your research here at the university, right? A key outcome to show that you have impact is doing publications. And so you have to push out a bunch of publications. In the Netherlands, if you want to get your PhD, you need to bundle them all together, all your publications, into a book. And they need to have a bunch of chapters, right? And so you would have to have you need to have 4 or 5 publications at least, so that you have a couple of chapters to turn into your book. And so my book here was crossing barriers because I had to get those VHHs into the brain. So at this point, you're kind of done with your PhD, right? And I realized that the thing that really drew me to this kind of work is the fact that you're really working on some really cool new technologies, some really cool new discoveries, things that have not been done before, if you're doing it right, right? Because if you're doing things that have been done before already during your PhD, you probably want to push a little harder. Push a bit back on your supervisor and say, okay, let's find some things that are truly at the edge of what is known. Right? You want to explore that very unknown area where not everything is going to go right. In fact, about 80% or so of your experiments are going to go wrong, and that's okay, because there's no real wrong in this kind of science, right? This kind of science means that you are doing stuff that haven't been done before, and so you make a hypothesis, right? You say, I assume that this is the case, and then you go do tests, experiments, to either prove that you were right, or more likely, prove that you were, well, not 100% wrong yet, right? So you take the scientific approach to science. You should always do that, right? You say, I have an assumption, and I'm doing a whole bunch of tests to see if I was right or wrong. If I was wrong, not a big deal. That's why those 80% of failures is totally fine. It's not a big deal. It just means that now I can take a new hypothesis and go forward, so that eventually you can get papers that, like in Dr. Ahmed's case, goes into Nature and Nature Neuroscience. Very impressive. At some point during my bachelor's, right at that edge actually, between the master's and bachelor's, I met someone who would eventually become my wife. She also was doing her research in the biotechnology space as an undergrad and a graduate student. And she also did a PhD on Alzheimer's disease in Amsterdam. But she's about 2 years ahead of me in basically everything, right? And so she was done with her PhD about 2 years before I was done. And she got headhunted because to Jacksonville, Florida, at the Mayo Clinic, which is a very well-known hospital system in the United States. And she got headhunted because after she was done with her PhD, she looked around in the Netherlands to find something that would fit her expertise, and she couldn't really find it. She couldn't fit something that would be a perfect fit for her. And instead of settling for something, she said, no, screw this, I'm going to keep on looking. And during her PhD, she had a colleague who had moved to Jacksonville, to the United States, and found that colleague there, called her up one day and told her, like, hey, there is a position here that's a perfect fit for you. And so she actually went there, had the interview, agreed it was a perfect fit. So she came back and we're like, we've got 2 years problem here, right? If she goes there now, I'll be in the Netherlands for 2 years alone, and she'll be there for 2 years alone. But it was an opportunity we couldn't say no to. Right? It was a great opportunity, a perfect fit, and very prestigious university to go to, the Mayo Clinic. And so she went, and I basically commuted back and forth a few times to Florida. I, in fact, wrote to the Alzheimer's Foundation in the Netherlands for a grant to be able to do a collaborative, again, research project at the Mayo Clinic. Remember that I said I made those viruses in the US? That's exactly where I made them, right? So I went to the US to get that done. While I was there, those back and forth, I got to meet, obviously, a couple of people, made some connections, some weak connections, and was able to ensure that by the time that I would be done with my PhD, or at least with the research side of my PhD, I could join a lab over there. And so the next chapter in this all is going for the postdoc positions, right? So the US is obviously a very different country than the Netherlands, and so I need to get visas to be able to, be there and work there. And so I got a visa to be a postdoc in the US. And at first, I was working in a research laboratory run by Professor Anders Nykjær, a Danish guy. Well, I started a lab there in 2000, about a year before I joined him. There was two guys from India there, one postdoc and one technician. There was a guy from Argentina there. And there were a lot of, not a lot, but there were quite some visiting students coming there for a couple of weeks up to a couple of months, including Dr. Mariam. And that's where I've actually met Dr. Mariam in the lab of Dr. Anders Nukier in Jackson, which was great. A lot of fun. I actually have a picture of that. I'm going to show it at the very end. You've seen it already. So that's where we met them. At the same time, what's the biggest objective for, besides getting publications? What's the core thing that a PI needs to do in the laboratory? Anyone? Before I just keep talking to y'all. I ask a question again. You're a PI now. What's the key thing that you need to do? Get money, right? It doesn't matter where in the world you are, whether you're in the Netherlands, whether you're in the US, whether you're in Egypt. If you're the boss of a lab, that's your core thing, right? You need to basically tell your students and your researchers to do the work to get publications out so that you can use those publications to come up with new theories so that you can go to the funding agencies and say, give me money to do this new theory, right? After 2 years in that lab, unfortunately, we tried, but unfortunately, we did not get that next level funding, that big funding that we wanted and needed to keep the lab running. And so the PI said, sounds great. I will go back to Denmark. Good luck, guys. Which is, part of life as a postdoc, right? Every year you will get at least in the US, you get a contract renewal. And every year you're going to have to find that funding. And the reality is there is not enough funding for the number of researchers that are out there. So every year, some of the researchers will have to do something different. Right? And so that happened to us as well. And so the lab closed down. I was lucky enough that while I was there at Mayo Clinic, I got to meet a lot more people. Right? And so there was a new professor coming in from a different university that came to Mayo Clinic. He was in a different field. It was in neurosurgery. Right? And so we had a conversation and we thought, you know what? This is all the brains, right? Neurosurgery, neurodegeneration. I can probably bring some new, fresh perspectives to the table from my Alzheimer's and neurodegeneration perspective to brain cancer, neurosurgery. And so for about 2 more years, I studied glioblastoma, a very bad brain cancer, honestly. I went from a disease that takes years, decades, to even just manifest. And then once manifested, when you have mild cognitive impairment, another 10 years or so before it truly becomes a significant lethal problem, to a disease that in 2 years' time will kill whoever have had it. Right? There is no cure for either of these 2 diseases, but this one is a much faster end. And so the cycle started over, right? Go do your postdoc, get papers out so that you can get grants, so that you can get funding, so you can do another year of postdoc, so you can do it again and again and again. All right. Before I move to this one, let me bring something up. It means this. It's a tribute to each of these, right? There's an academic pyramid of success. Now, to get to that gold dome at the top, be the full professor, it used to be, and I'm talking quite a while ago, you do your graduate education, so you do your doctoral thesis, right? And you convince the world that you added a little bit to that, a little bit more known to that spectrum of the unknown. And then you immediately become an assistant professor, right? You join the research group. And after a couple of years of assisting a professor, you will become a full professor. Right? This is a while ago. It no longer exactly works like that, right? Most
Called something else, not a pyramid.
What do they call it?
Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, you're right. It's a pyramid scheme. Anyway, in fact, it is basically the base supporting the 1%. Right? That's not exactly that 1%, but getting to that top over there. The reality is that it takes a lot of hard work and dedication. It takes a lot of hard work, dedication, intelligence. It also takes being able to have the right resources and mindset to see when you get lucky and capitalize on get that little stroke of luck, the serendipity that all of us will get every now and then. But it takes a lot of work to actually recognize it and then accumulate on it. And then, yep. It's fair, but I do think that most people will get lucky. But you have to also be able to recognize it and then act on it. And this is truly could be truly luck. Being in the right ecosystem at the right time, being the right person at the right time. Right? Sometimes you have someone sitting there and who just happens to get there just before you were saying like, hey, I want to go up there. And that person is going to sit there for a while. Right? Makes it a lot more difficult. So yeah, you're right. Downplaying the luck component. But when that happens, it takes guts and bravery to realize like, what, that's not the right path. Let me take a different stab at a different route. Right. It also, just to make life a little bit harder in this space, this is no longer the actual real life situation. They added a couple of steps in between. Right. You now have, after you're done here, maybe you become a fellow for a little bit, a research fellow. And then, you could become the assistant professor, but what if we just add in another name called research associate? And what if instead of assistant professor, we now are an associate professor in between there first? All steps to, gain a little bit more experience or just stay a little bit longer and hoping that 1% position opens up in front of you. Right. And so I thought at some point, like, okay, this is all super cool. But maybe this pyramid is not for me. Maybe I need to look for an alternative career. Now, I want to point out that pyramid leads to a 1%. So 99% of the other things is the alternative career. So maybe the academic route is the alternative. So academic science, right? Academic science focuses on getting your word out there by publishing papers, right? And it encourages people to come up with real cool discoveries from a scientific perspective, and then sharing the word. That mindset can be applied to many other places as well. For that mindset, you don't have to stay in academic science. When I was in that neurosurgery department, right, doing my second postdoc, I participated in this one course called Case Studies in Entrepreneurship. And they explicitly stated there that they want to apply that scientific mindset to innovation at scale. But now the outcome of your new cool discoveries should not be yet another paper, but impacting way more people by turning it into something that can be packaged and perhaps sold down the road, moved to more people. Entrepreneurship. Remember that I told you that I did a little specialization during my master's? What did I call it? What was it called? See if you pay attention. Pop quiz. Anyone? I did science-based business. Remember? During my master's. And during my bachelor's, I took that year off to talk to all these startup companies. All right? I told you there was some foreshadowing right there. When I did this course, that reminded me right of it again. I remember I said like, oh, you know what? I can do a PhD now and then come back into the industry later. Obviously, I went to the US where you have to have a visa, and the visa explicitly say you can be a postdoc, and that's it. If you're not a postdoc, I'm going to kick you out of the country. I didn't necessarily want to get kicked out of the country, so my wife was still a very successful postdoc. And so at the end of this course, the PI, the professor, said like, hey, you know what? We're starting a brand new laboratory. Doesn't have actual wet lab stuff. We are going to study the science of translation of science. And I need postdocs who want to join in. I was like, oh, that sounds great. So postdoc, I can do it with my visa, right? And it gets me out of the lab and into this alternative route. And so I applied and I was offered a job. I don't know if you know the Mayo Clinic perchance, but the Mayo Clinic has basically 3 main locations, right? You got one in Jacksonville, Florida, nice and warm on the beach, that kind of stuff. You got one in Arizona, very warm and in the desert. And then you got one in the big one in Rochester, Minnesota, which has tunnels to go underground because in winter it gets so cold, it's not safe to be outside. So when they said like, hey, you want to join our lab? We have all the people up here. My wife and I said like, we've been moving around a bit, but let's not go to the frozen tundra of the north and just start the Office of Entrepreneurship here on the Florida campus. And so that's what we did. Or at least what I did. My wife stayed as a postdoc in the neurosurgery department. By now, she has moved, by the way, from a Alzheimer's field also to neurosurgery. And I joined the Office of Entrepreneurship. And we started the office over there. And the key thing that we do there now is quite simply the exact same thing, or on the basis of it all, the same thing that you do as a scientist. We look for unacceptable problems, or we taught people on how to look for unacceptable problems and thinking the status quo needs to go. Alzheimer's disease is an unacceptable problem. Brain cancer that kills you in 2 years is an unacceptable problem, right? There is no difference between what I did before to what I'm doing now or what I'm teaching here now, except that I'm in a slightly different position now. And most importantly, the outcome is slightly different. Instead of just a publication, we want to see maybe businesses being formed out of it, or licenses that can be patented, or new technologies that can be sold. And the key underlying to visualize this difference is the way you look at the translation of science, right? So conventionally, we talk about translation of science, and that means taking a cool innovation and turn it into something that people can use, whether that's a publication or a business. And conventionally, we leave it as bench to best. That would mean that you come up with a really cool idea at the bench, the desk where you're pivoting. And if it's great enough and it actually solves an unmet need at the bedside, well, then obviously it must automatically go to the bedside because it's a good idea and it solves a need. Except that in real life, that's not how it works. Right? In real life, it's more of a 3B model where businesses play a key role as well. That means that your innovations on the bench need not only to meet the unmet needs of patients, but also need to be formatted in value propositions that businesses can understand. It also means that not every unmet need of a patient is going to get solved, right? It needs to be explained as an opportunity for research, as well as an opportunity for scalable inventions. And the same thing for businesses. Not every idea is being picked up by a business. It needs to solve an actual problem, and also needs to be technically possible with the technologies that we have today or tomorrow. But not something that maybe one day in the future, and definitely not something that has been done and tested decades ago, right? It also forces us to think a little bit more narrow around what problem you're actually going to solve. So I just said Alzheimer's is an unacceptable problem, right? Or brain cancer is, but those are actually complex issues. There is not one solution to Alzheimer's disease. We don't even know what's causing Alzheimer's disease exactly. There are many different problems within that. And because there are many different problems, there are many different solutions. And therefore, all of those solutions may solve just a small part of the actual complex issue. What we want to get to, and what we're training in that class that I showed you the flyer of, so we train people for, to go from a complex issue to complicated problems. That means that you narrow down what exactly it is within brain cancer that you're trying to solve, so that you can get it all the way down to one specific statement. For example, getting access to a tumor that is hidden behind some eloquent areas, right? That is difficult. I mean, it's not easy to get to that space, but it has a logical solution. Well, maybe we can go with a flexible needle around it, or maybe the right solution is to open up the brain and very carefully move it away while we are measuring what's going on in the brain. Not easy, but it is one solution for one problem set. So getting down to that concept is very hard and takes a little bit of training. So that's what we do. We also do fun things, like the alligator tank. Anyone heard of the Shark Tank here? Yeah, a couple of people. So at this time, I'm in Florida, right? Florida, we don't necessarily have, well, we also have sharks, but that's also, so we got alligators over there. And at the alligator tank, which is a very short pitch competition, basically, we ask, what's the problem? What's the solution? Why you? Why now? And importantly, how's it a business? What's your business invention? And we give 120 seconds to answer those questions. Very, very short, 2 minutes. Not 2 minutes, but 120 seconds. At 121 seconds, we'll send an alligator onto stage and get you off stage. However, and I'll go back to that same statement again that I made earlier, it is no different than doing bench-side science, right? It is still, if you are applying to a grant, like the National Institutes of Health, or maybe a grant here in Egypt, they're still going to ask you the same questions. What's the disease that you're working on? What's the problem? Right? They're going to ask you, what's the hypothesis? What do you think is the underlying solution here? Right? That you're going to go and test. In fact, what have you done in the past to prove that you're the right person to do this? And what exactly is your current and your preliminary data to prove that now is the right time to invest in your cool new theories? And then most importantly, what's the translational potential of this science? Why should we invest in you and not in all the other great ideas that we've heard today? Right? And at the NIH, anyway, in the US, you get a single page to explain all of that. So all of this stuff is also very, very simple. It's important to keep that in mind because you will see that in your current studies, in your future studies, you will learn all these transferable skills that are all going to be applicable to your next step in your career, right? And so for me, it wasn't really that hard to move from bench science into realizing like, okay, I think I'm not going to be a full professor in this specific field. And then moving into the Office of Entrepreneurship, Innovation Entrepreneurship at Mayo Clinic. Let me pull up that slide one more time there. This one. Because there's one last thing that I wanted to bring up. So I joined the Office of Entrepreneurship in 2018. So it was focused on entrepreneurial education and the science of translational science, right? The theory behind that 3B model, basically. But there's one little thing here that I'm extra proud of, and that's the assistant professor of CTS. What do you think CTS stands for? I have a slide in a different presentation that says, do not use any jargon on your slides. No abbreviations whatsoever. So I'm very sorry. What do you think CTS stands for? Anyone want to guess? Yes, no, something translational science, 100%. Yes, exactly right. Oh, it was an explainable abbreviation. So I get away with it. Thank you. Clinical translational science. The reason why I'm proud of it is because this didn't exist yet, right? And so when I joined the Office of Entrepreneurship, I left the laboratory. When I was a postdoc in Alzheimer's disease, I knew that I could become a full professor in neuroscience. Maybe, right? 1% chance. When I got into postdoc in neurosurgery, I knew I could be theoretically, a full professor in neurological surgery. But when I became a postdoc in the Office of Entrepreneurship, I had no idea where to go. I couldn't see my own ladder anymore. I didn't know if I could be an assistant professor, an associate professor, what. And so we were thinking and said, well, this is a new office as a postdoc in clinical translational science. So it would make sense if we go and try to get that as a new field of rank to get started. Making sense and actually making it happen are two wildly different things, right? Mayo Clinic is a 150-year-old institution. Very proud of its 50 fields of rank of all, neuroscience, cancer biology, all those kind of different fields. And when you go there and say like, hey, let's add one to it, they're like, well, wait a second. So it took us about a good 4 or 5 years before they even considered adding something to it. And then they said, okay, what does that mean? What does a professor in clinical translational science then actually study? Right? So we explained that, the 3B model component, for example, and eventually we got it through. And in May 2024, I was one of the very first assistant professors in clinical translational science. I was super proud of myself. And so to celebrate on June 2024, I joined the Dell Medical School in Texas, left Mayo Clinic, and with that, had to leave behind my assistant professor title because, at Dell Medical School, they don't have clinical translational science field. So that was a bit unfortunate. But I joined the Dell Medical School in June last year. And the reason for this is quite simple, actually. The Office of Entrepreneurship at Mayo Clinic was formed under one big grant. The big grant mechanism that Mayo Clinic had at the time, around translational science. And that grant mechanism had a director, and the director had left Mayo Clinic and to become the dean at the Dell Medical School. As the dean of the medical school, she then called my former PI, the one who said, like, hey, we're forming this new office, and who wants to be a postdoc? Called him up. At that time, he was no longer the director of that new office. And said, like, hey, do you want to come here to Austin, Texas, to basically be the vice president of research, innovation, and research translation? He said, that sounds like a great plan. Let's do it. About a year after that, he then called me and said, like, hey, you remember that one course that you took in the Office of Entrepreneurship, and then took that one course and turned it into a series of classes and courses at Mayo Clinic? Like, yep. You want to come here to Austin and do that again, but it's Texas, so bigger and better. Like, well, that sounds awesome. Let's go do that. And so we upheaved the entire family of me, my wife, and a whole bunch of cats. And we moved to Austin, Texas last year. We made the position of assistant dean in medical innovation and entrepreneurship. I'm saying we made the position because when he called me, he said, okay, what am I going to be there? It's like, well, I need an education specialist. And it's like, well, right now, at that time, I was an entrepreneurial education manager at the Office of Entrepreneurship at Mayo Clinic, which, by the way, did not exist before. We had to write it up ourselves. Right? And it's like, well, I'm not going to move from manager to education specialist because I think words matter, right? When you make these kind of quite important choices in your career, it's important to think about, okay, what does that look like? And so, we said, well, we don't have anything else. Like, well, we talked about it, and eventually we decided, okay, you know what, we're going to call it Assistant Dean of Medical Innovation and Entrepreneurship. We ended up coming up with a job description because the job description didn't exist yet. Right? And so all of those things, I'm just trying to say that because just because it wasn't there yet, it doesn't mean that you cannot just create it and see if you can get it done. Right? Write your own job descriptions. But the only reason why it was possible is because I already knew that director from before. Right? The only reason that I am here is because I knew Dr. Mariam. Right? The reason why I studied that course to begin with is because my sister went there and did it before me. And obviously I knew my sister. Right? Trying to say there is that you want to be very careful and thoughtful about the people that you meet and go out and collaborate to meet more people because, obviously it's going to take a few years, but those kind of connections are going to come back to you to collaborate in the future further, right? It took, what is it? Actually, let's pull it up. It took about 15 years between between us meeting in Jacksonville and us being here again in Cairo. We had a poll over there. We wanted to figure out, who was there, let's say. Remember that I said that I took a year off to work with to explore these collaborations, and we formed the board. These were the guys at the board at the time, right? A bunch of guys. I don't know why. Just every other year it's a very mixed bag, but this time it was 5 guys. 2005. A couple of months ago, we met up in London again because one of us is now living in London, right? It takes 20 years here, but we are still having conversations to see, okay, how can we work together in the future, right? What I'm trying to point out is that you want to be clear about who you meet and find opportunities to meet more people in your field. Right now, what I do on a day-to-day basis is basically building out this health innovation pathway, right? I took that one course at Mayo Clinic and turned it into 5 courses. At Dell Med, they told me to do more, so we're doing more. We have a course load for everyone from before they get into medical school, all the way throughout medical school. After they leave medical school and become postdocs or fellows or residents, all the way up into faculty, staff, and maybe one day I'll put in an emeritus session here. The whole point of this is to expose innovators or students in the life sciences to innovation early on, get them to figure out that concept of complex problems, right? Solve problems, execute an innovation when they're in a position that they can actually impact patient care, and eventually recruit and retain top talent. And given that I'm at the time here, I want to pull up this last slide here and say that it was an absolute honor to be talking with you guys, explaining a little bit on how I got here. And like Marion was saying, a very winding road that led me from the Netherlands to Curacao, back to the Netherlands, to study in Leiden, to work in Jacksonville, Florida, to now in Austin, Texas, and today here in Cairo. And a couple of days, the first day that I arrived here, Mariam took me to the Grand Egyptian Museum, which turned out to be closed. So I absolutely have to come back one day. So by all means, connect, because maybe one day in the future, we all can do something together as well. Thank you very much. That's a great question. So the question is, how do you balance narrowing down your problem statement, like making it smaller, basically, to the concept of you need a big market that actually makes it financially viable, right? By having an actual business out of it. It's a great question. The key thing here is that what you need to create is product market fit. So product, I don't have a slide for on this thing. No, I don't have a slide for that. But product market fit basically means that you say, this is the actual problem that I know my customers have. And I know these are my customers. And I know my customers need to be able to do this. These are the pains that are stopping them from doing that now. And these are the things that they need to be able to do it. And my solution is exactly that. It 100% allows our pains to be gone. It does all the things our customer needs to be done. And so combined, our product allows our customer to do exactly what they need. If you have that product market fit, then you have narrowed down your problem deep enough to say, okay, now I can stop narrowing it down and get to that solution. And then you need to look at, okay, who's my customer really, right? How big is that market? And who else could be a customer after that, right? And so you can usually see that similarly to, the transferable skills that we've been learning during our research years that can be applied to innovation as well, right? In the same way, your solution can probably be applied to slightly different customer segments who all have that same problem. And by exploring, okay, where I'm going to start now as a place to learn, to experiment, to optimize the solution, and then being able and explicitly able to grow to bigger markets down the road allows you to show that you have a viable business model and a path to the market. So you kind of want to go through that balance, basically. Start small, but then move quickly to a bigger market. Yes.
Well, maybe that's different from the States compared to Europe, but you experience some sort of resistance with reductions from scientists to actually move in that direction because I'm
Yeah.
not specific to
Yeah, I love that. I love that you're asking that because it no longer is that much the case. But when I did my own, let's say when I was in that board, right, doing the bachelor part, this was the dark side, right? Like you have the noble pursuit of brand new innovation that allows scientists to contribute to that, to close up that unknown bit, right? Contribute their knowledge to the benefit of humanity. And then you've got the evil capitalists who want to make a lot of money out of all of that kind of stuff. Right? You're sick, great, here, take a pill. Right? We've noticed a shift in that mentality for two reasons. The first one is that I think people are starting to understand that actually there's very much overlap. Right? The end goal is dissemination of innovation, right? In either of those two directions. And the second thing is a little bit to that point that people are starting to realize that your Nature publication is going to be read by a lot of very important people, but not a lot of people. Whereas if you can take it and turn it into, on one hand, a Nature publication, but more importantly, CRISPR-Cas9, for example, into something that can be used by other people, you can get on one hand the Nobel Prize for your super cool innovation, but on the other hand, also create it in a way that people can use it all over the world to accelerate genetic transformation, right? So that we can now actually have cure certain kinds of blindness in patients that were born blind, because you can have somatic or local actually modifications of your DNA, gene therapies. So I think people are starting to understand that taking that 3B model in mind doesn't mean that you have to, become filthy rich. In fact, most innovators won't get filthy rich, just so you know. Not a golden path to super success. Look at me. But yeah, it's a very valid point. In fact, we've had conversations, especially if this is the bigger problem within research itself. If your value as a scientist is mostly measured or solely measured in the number of publications you get out, and your technology transfer office, which is the one who usually makes patents, for example, to valorize this innovation, tells you don't publish yet because then I cannot patent it anymore. So keep it to yourself. Don't tell anyone yet. But let me do this for like half a year or a year, right? It delays your publication rate, and that might be problematic. And so at Mayo Clinic and also now at Dell Med, we have been pretty successful in getting people to understand, well, actually a patent is as valuable as a good publication, right? But that's definitely a mindset change that needs to happen at the higher levels.
Anyone has any questions? Even if you want to ask in Arabic, because maybe you're shy to speak English.
Sure.
Say it in Arabic and I will translate.
Yes, please.
Sometimes if you feel like the stress is really how to handle that situation?
Life balance, right? Work-life balance. Basically, how do you handle stress? It's on one hand it's super difficult, mostly because in coming out of the Netherlands, and especially having been grown up on the Caribbean, life is more chill than it is in the United States. I can tell you that. It's not worse or bad, better or worse, right? It just mentality difference. I think the key thing is that you need to be very realistic about how much you can handle, how many balls you keep up in the air at the same time, and being able to learn to say no to certain opportunities because you want to focus on others. Remember that I said I picked life science technology because it had all these different courses, so I could keep all the doors out. Right? I've by now learned that maybe that's not the best attitude for your own sanity. Being able to say no to certain projects and realizing that you're not saying no because the project is bad, but just because you don't have time to do it well is very, very important skill to learn. I'm not good at it, so don't look to me to how to do it. Just theory is there, right? That's a key thing. Saying no first. Second thing is to build teams around you, to collaborate and hand off things that other people can do as well as yourself, or perhaps probably even better than you, so people who can then do that, and not trying to claim that success, right? Just saying, okay, we're collaborating on this, you're going to do this, it's going to be a win-win situation for both of us, but handing it off and giving that authority is also a possibility to help reduce your own workload a bit to manageable sanity levels. But both of things are easier said than done. It takes a lot of practice. And it takes also the acceptance that sometimes it will not turn out well, right? Sometimes handing it off is going to lead to a worse product or a worse outcome. And accepting that is part of the game. And sometimes saying no to an opportunity in hindsight will be seen as like, you probably should have said yes. Doesn't matter. Life goes on.
I have another question. So one thing I notice often being in a center, for instance, is the type of technologies like AI, CRISPR, and so on the medical field. Because I think medical doctors in general want to move very fast. The technologies are really good,
yeah,
but sometimes things are not sort of super ready for that translation. So in your position, how do you manage this actually? Sort of people when is technology ready, and what can you realistically do with it?
I love that you're saying that. There's a theory on this. It's called the Gartner hype cycle. Are you familiar with that, Chance? So Gartner is a consulting firm, I think, or basically they analyze data. And at some point they said that every single idea goes across a hype cycle. It goes like this, the Gartner hype cycle goes like this. This is the here's a burgeoning new idea, right? So it's a moment of maturity here for time. And here's the hype, or the expectations, right? And so the theory is the Gartner hype cycle says that any idea will first go on this towards this peak of inflated expectations, right? It will very rapidly go up like that. And AI, for example, has been on that peak a few times. Bitcoin was on that in the beginning. Bitcoin is a great example because Bitcoin went on this hype cycle like crazy, right? It went up, everybody says, oh, it's going to change the world, right? Everybody's going to go and switch to Bitcoin. No one will have real money, right? Same with AI. AI is this amazing thing. 5 years ago or 10 years ago, everybody said, like, look, if you have this idea, you just toss in the word AI, black box of AI, and now everything is cool, right? No one asks you, how do you get the data, how do you get that kind of stuff, right? It's just AI will solve it. Peak of inflated expectations. It will then go to the throw of disillusionment, right? People will realize that we've hyped it up too much, and people will be disappointed, especially people with lots of influence and lots of power in this space. And the majority of masses will say, guys, this is not okay. Right? It's a classic bubble story, right? Super high expectations will not get met by definition, and it will deep into the throw of disillusion. And then you get the slope of enlightenment. That's what the term is. Means that there are a few people who have understood, okay, maybe we shouldn't hype it up as much, but there is some real benefit to the blockchain. There is some real incredible benefit to artificial intelligence, right? And being able to leverage them in the right way, it can give you much more leverage and much more exposure and support and growth, etc. Right? And so more and more people start to see the realistic potential of these technologies, until eventually it plateaus out at a real level of sustained innovation. The big question is, where are you? Right? The very, very big question is, are you here or are you here? Because you want to jump in here. Right? If you jump in here, fine. You just need to realize that it probably is gonna drop, right? So get out before it drops. You jump in here, obviously that's unfortunate. Very hard to see up front, right? This is all hindsight. Ideally, you go to a point where you say, yeah, it has been through a hype. And now we have people who are very serious about it. AI is at that spot, right? AI has gone, it goes, there are subsets within AI who are going again to a new hype cycle, right? People will say that, oh yeah, no, Copilot is gonna, solve your entire, it's gonna help with all that stress, right? It's not. But there is some significant benefit to using AI in anything you do today. So yeah, that's realizing that this exists is step one. Now figuring out where on the curve you are, that's the part that you won't get it right every single time. That's science, right? Make an hypothesis. I think it's here. Let's test. Yeah.
I have a question.
Mhm.
I'm a co-organizer in this Arab pitch competition.
Yep.
And we were talking about the applications we received, and one of the comments were that the older applicants and the researchers and faculty members, they see everything through the lens of the publications, and they're no longer capable of thinking in terms of innovation or marketing.
Right.
Does that mean we should give up on, like, if someone is already a PC holder and they're thinking like, maybe I want to do something, is it too late at this point? Or-
Can you teach an old dog new tricks? Right? Can you teach an old dog new tricks?
Exactly.
Oh yeah, that's basically the thought, right? So first of all, I think I strongly believe in lifelong learning. So I do generally think that it's totally fine. It will change per person, I'm sure. But I do think that lifelong learning is something that you all should take with and do be able to learn new tricks no matter where you are in life. But no, I don't think you should give up on those things. I think you need to be more explicit about what your requirements are, right? I think if you're very clear about what the outcomes of a pitch competition is supposed to be and what kind of inputs you therefore want to see in innovations, I think it's easier for people to self-select, saying, well, that's not my type of thing, I'm going to do something else. And other people who are more excited about that vision will join it. So
have you seen any examples from your experience, the faculty members already which we wanted?
So in the biotech and life sciences in general, the startup companies that are successful are run by people who are further in their career, right? But biotech is hard, right? It's hard because it's not just do you have a business model, but also is the science correct, right? In technology, for example, if you come up with the next Facebook, right? You can go out, make a half-baked idea, vibe code it with some of these AI tools and get it out by the end of this presentation, right? You generally can. You can get something out very, very quickly nowadays and get feedback from people, right? Saying like, oh, this doesn't work. This works great. I like that bit. I don't like this bit, and change it and update it. And if you move fast enough, you can change it. Your science, there's no real science. Your science doesn't have to be perfect when you get it out. If you do that with a new drug, people are not going to be super happy with you. And people, I mean, regulatory affairs and, the FDA and all the other people, right? If you say like, well, this drug is probably going to work, but, we'll see. People are not too happy about that. And so you tend to see that lots of research happens before you go truly to spin-off status. And many successful companies are run by, people with their who have at least PhDs in their team, in their C-suite.
The program would reward some commission, that's the funders and to say that that's how it should be evaluated. So that means that the university tries to take your organization, teaching your patient care, photography, or I would say career progression. So then no one can say, well, you haven't published enough because you were teaching.
Oh yeah.
You haven't published enough because you haven't published.
Yeah.
Is it in another lens?
Yeah, but I think it's important in other places. But at some point it has to come from the funder, right? Because the funder is still looking for people who have no publications, but everyone could have publications.
Exactly.
If lectures pay people a lot of money, if that's what will get me the money, then I'm going to do the right. And the money giver sees it simply that this one.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the point. Cool. Oh. Sure. When I started, did I face any difficulties? Look, you always face difficulties, right? Some are bigger, some are smaller, but when you're at the moment, all of them look big, right? The choice to go to the US or not was an incredibly hard decision. Going from Curacao to the Netherlands, very hard decision to make, right? But once you make a decision like that, you just gotta commit and deal with the situation as it is from that point on. So don't overthink it. In 5 years, you look back and say like, well, it's hard, but this is what it is.
How did you manage this?
Sorry?
How did you manage this?
Well, let me be clear here. The difficulties that I faced were never seriously life-threatening or anything like that, right? And so I'm quite serious about this. So it's I've never had that moment where I would fear for my life or my poverty or something like that, where I've been put into. And so I can take that step back and think like, well, we'll live through it and we'll be fine. Like I don't know what it look like, but we'll figure it out. Have that fear. So other than that, I don't want to get too philosophical here, but it has to come a little bit from your own inner self-worth, right? Like, I know that at the end of it, it could be just me, and it's okay. I know my wife loves me; it's fine. This, that, the other. I know that the family that supports me. Even if that, so for example, when I switched from the neurosurgery department to the research lab, and I realized I'm sorry, out of the research lab, I realized I'm never going to be in that research lab. It's a very hard decision to make, right? But I was like, it's the worst that can happen. Do this for a few years, and then I'll have to find something new. Right? Same thing when the Danish lab closed down, the Danish PI's lab closed down. Like, really hard. The risk that it could be is that I get extradited out of the country, exported out of the country, deported out of the country, actually, kicked out of it because I don't have a job. And we'll figure it out when we get there. Right? So that's maybe it's a bit too much of the Caribbean mentality. It's like, we'll see. Problem for Manya.
Egyptian, we'll figure it out.
We'll burn that bridge when we get there. All right, thank you very much, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you
Pleasure
very
being
much.
here.
And thank you for asking. Thanks, Dr. Ahmed.
Let's stop the share.
Yes.
I did.
Oh, that now it's now it's